Hi, sorry about that. I just got a message from Dr. Silkman, and I might as well disseminate that piece of information first. Instead of Monday, we're going to go for Tuesday, because hopefully he'll have recovered from the hangover. So anyway, so we're going to go for Tuesday, same time Tuesday instead of Monday. So not 2 days time, but 3 days time from now. Jazz Naz, hi there. Now I did watch Scotland at the football, and they got through on that one. I presume not about the rugby. I'm confused. I've just had a pupil whose mum is married to a top coach, international rugby coach, who doesn't coach Scotland, but she seemed to think that Scotland were playing tomorrow sometime. But if they're playing today, I will go and watch them in a wee while. This is apparently a 10-minute read. Might take a little bit longer. Where to begin? Obviously, watching Making a Murderer when I did in March of. Just make sure everything's working okay. Watching Making a Murderer, March 2016. Most of the stuff that I've seen, most articles I've read have been since then. So this is before March of 2016. This is very early, very soon after Making a Murderer was released, this article. Hi there, Bean Green. Hi, JD. Hi, Sean. And Jazz, hi there. So I read this article, and it was a bit of a surprise at the end when it was revealed that the person writing the article actually believes in Stephen's guilt. So I did email the author of the article. I haven't had a reply back. I've also been in touch with who else? I've been in touch with Bose12345. He messaged me at the beginning of the week. Haven't heard anything since. Hopefully we can get something sorted out. I've been in contact, or I've tried to contact Sean Reck to see if he would come on and talk about obviously his Murder in the Park documentary, and also tell us a little bit more, hopefully, about the Convicting a Murderer, which is being billed some places as Making a Murder Series 3. Yep, hi there, Runs with Scissors, and Sean, glad to hear that. That's good. So we wait and see. I just this morning I got a message from somebody to say that there was somebody else that would be from the sort of guilter community that would want to come on and present their side of the argument, as it were. I think it's one thing I've learned from reading, as I say, the Blind Injustice book, that in the same way that when Aston Villa beat Liverpool 7-2, from my point of view, it was just purely good play by Aston Villa. From the little lad who I teach, who's a Liverpool fan, he couldn't understand how Liverpool had been so bad that day. But there's the facts are there. It was 7-2, but from my point of view, it was all about how good Villa were. From him, it was all about how poor the Liverpool team were. Yeah, Trial 4. I've started watching it. Very interesting case to do with, I believe, the Boston police. Certainly, I've only just started watching it. It certainly looks to me, because he was shot at point blank range with somebody who had got in the car with him. Somebody that knew that they wanted to get him for a reason. And obviously, one of the suspicions from me, being a suspicious sort of guy, is, could it have been somebody from the police themselves? Anyway, speculated. And like I said yesterday, attorneys like Dean Strang and Jerry Buting and Steve Drizzen and Laura Nyrider and Kathleen Zellner, they're not allowed to speculate, but we are. And we do. And I'm going to shut up. Well, I'm going to talk about other things and concentrate on what we should be concentrating on and show you this article. As I say, I did get in touch with the author, sent an email, haven't had a reply, but my question to him was, since Making a Murder Series 2 has came out, has his opinion changed regarding his assessment that he thinks Steve is guilty? Anyway, let's look at the article. I thought this was an excellent summary of Making a Murder. I'm being totally distracted by the chat, so I'm just going to try and look away. It keeps coming up, so nah, keep it coming. Hopefully you can see that okay. Hopefully. Thirsty work, this. So this is by Sam Wellborn, and he wrote on January the 7th, 2016, here's the real horror behind Making a Murderer. While I'm quick to loathe spoilers, I really wish somebody would have just told me that I was going to be disappointed by Making a Murderer. I, like probably many others who watched this show, expected a real-life translation of True Detective. Who committed the murder? Steve, the corrupt police, somebody called Martin Shkreli. Now, I had to look him up. I'd never heard the name before. Martin Shkreli is currently doing 7 years in federal prison for securities fraud. He set up a pharmaceutical company, a lot of shenanigans. There was one pill that suddenly went up from being $50 a pill to $750 a pill or something like that. Anyway, so obviously he's one of these public enemies, Martin Shkreli. And I think the author, Sam Wellborn, I would give him credit. He does seem to have a pretty good sense of humor. Although you really should go watch it right now, I'll throw the spoiler alert here, because in order to understand who the real perpetrator is in Making a Murderer, you need to know how the story ends. So whilst he's saying he's disappointed, he's saying you really do need to watch it. And I think we all have. So here goes. Some of his facts are not quite right. You might shout out at the screen at some of the things that he's written, because he's not right about certain things. Here goes. Stephen Avery, who could modestly be described as a troubled human, was falsely imprisoned for 18 years in, and I presume he meant to write in and under, suspicious circumstances. DNA evidence got him released, and he was in the late stages of a $36 million lawsuit against the Sheriff's Department and the Wisconsin Attorney General's office. I don't know that he was actually suing the Wisconsin Attorney General's office. It was the Manitowoc County Attorney Office. Anyway, but within the weeks after key prosecution elements were deposed, Steve was charged with the murder of Teresa Holbach, a vehicle photographer who occasionally worked with him. Well, I suppose that's one way of putting it. But much of the evidence is suspect, but admissible, mostly due to decisions made by the judge Patrick Willis at the request of the prosecutor, Kenneth Kratz, and he was convicted. Much of the prosecution's case was, at best, circumstantial and at worst, complete BS. This article, while published by a less than credible source, outlines most of the almost hilariously suspect evidence presented by the prosecution. Eventually, jurors found Steve guilty of intentional first-degree murder and felony possession of a firearm. They did not, however, find him guilty of mutilating a corpse, which is strange because the fact that the corpse was mutilated was, in itself, one of the key pieces of evidence pointing to Steve's guilt. Now, unless you're certain that everything is on the up and up with the prosecution, which would put you in a minute percentage of people, but you always get people who like to play devil's advocate, don't you? You never find out who actually committed the crimes for which they convict Avery. Intentionally or not, making a murderer opens like it's a gritty, real-life whodunit that appears to inch closer and closer to the logical, satisfying conclusion, but then shows you the sad, terrible truth. And according to Sam, writing at the time, we'll never know what actually happened. And that is exactly how I felt when I watched it. Here's the real monster. This is all by the design of the system that prosecutes him. Their jobs are to take this man and make him a murderer, if in no other way, by convicting him. Ask any trial attorney and they'll tell you the justice system, slipped up there and said the word, the legal system is not designed to investigate crimes. It's simply to convict people. And we saw that, didn't we, in other cases. For example, the Greg Davis case, where the policeman, the detective, got on the stand and was asked, what is your main job? To get a conviction. And all the judges are saying to him, no, it's to get the truth. You know, which bit of the handbook, the basic police handbook, did you not receive? At a glance, the convict first and ask questions later approach makes sense. People get accused of crimes. These people need to be investigated, tried, and if guilty, prosecuted. And no taxpayer wants to pay a prosecutor who doesn't convict anybody. Therefore, the more convictions, the better, right? It would certainly appear so. Currently, fewer than 8% of cases go to trial because of plea bargains, meaning automatic convictions. It's like a cheat code for the prosecution. Prosecutors all across the country depend on this. You want proof? See what would happen if everyone who took a plea bargain decided to go to trial. I presume everyone who didn't take a plea bargain decided to go to trial. Another spoiler here: it would destroy the court system. Well, it might do, but that doesn't make it right. So if you're a prosecutor who depends on what is essentially a life-ruining auto-fire button, and you want to make sure nobody spills surge on your career game, Genie, the most effective method is to ensure that a defense in a fair trial is so expensive that it's virtually impossible. Forget the fear of a more severe sentencing. Just going to trial is crazy expensive, to the point where just being accused of a crime can ruin your life, and that's assuming you aren't already poor. Trial lawyers are expensive. An attorney costs $2,000 to $3,000. Try $240,000, or over 400. Oh, in fairness, yes, or over 400 hours of work at minimum wage, and that's just for a misdemeanor, by the way. Move on to felony cases, and you're talking about years and years of working just to pay for an accusation. But even being, as I say, the guy's got a sense of humor, which I like. But even being the gun-burning, godless hippie that I am, I know this is a necessary evil. It takes time to build cases, gather evidence, and talk to witnesses, but it needs to be done. That's how you find the truth, which I think most people want if they think that, something needs to happen to people accused of a crime. But with the amount of money involved, you would demand, or at least expect, that there would be a lot of resources, if not the vast majority of them, dedicated towards finding the truth behind incidents, so that one could be certain the correct person is charged appropriate. But as making a murderer documents so brutally, it ain't happening. The system is meant to generate convictions, not convict appropriately. This distinction is the most horrifying aspect of the series. You can't look at a single element in the prosecution, in this case, and wonder which circle of bureaucratic hell these people came from. It's a wonderful line. You can't look at a single element in the prosecution, in this case, and wonder which circle of bureaucratic hell they came from. The judge of the murder trial, Patrick Willis, is in charge of the courtroom, meaning that he is obligated to provide a fair environment to try Steve. He doesn't do this exactly. He allows the prosecution to present as evidence the results of an FBI test on Steve's blood that's demonstrably unreliable, which just so happens to help the prosecution. He doesn't allow the defense time to test the exact same blood. He doesn't allow pre-trial instruction for the jury, in which they would be told that the most notorious man in the country should be treated fairly, since his previous rape charge is irrelevant to the case, something you would expect a fair prosecution should favor, since their case shouldn't really involve any event that didn't happen, especially one that didn't happen 23 years prior. One of the many times I found myself screaming at my screen was watching Judge Willis during Steve's sentencing. Willis doesn't directly address Steve until this point, where he goes on a dramatic, hand-wrenching monologue, claiming that Avery's crimes have been more and more severe. Presumably this includes the crime he didn't commit, but whatever. If you hadn't seen any of the show until this point, you'd think that the judge had never laid eyes on this man. Which I suppose would be fine if Willis wasn't almost entirely responsible for the environment in which the jury heard all of the evidence. And what evidence could be heard. The man was able to help the prosecution as he saw fit, help determine the outcome of the trial, but now switches to now be the executioner, so to speak, all in the name of protecting the public from a man who was abused by the system he controls. You get to watch a judge facilitate, nay, handhold the prosecution, and then watch his false disgust as he pretends to finally acknowledge that he knows Steve is guilty. But Willis is not an outlier. There's a long history of judges working in secret against the prosecuted. The prosecutor gets several unfair advantages against the defense in every criminal case everywhere, and it's no different with Steve. Kratz, the district attorney, works behind the scenes with the investigators and lab technicians, even sending them notes telling them the exact evidence he wants them to find to help his case. Think about that for a second. If it were to have come out that Steve's attorneys, Dean and Jerry, were asking detectives for specific information and evidence that would help acquit their client, it would have gathered so much drama and traffic that Nancy Grace would have had an on-the-spot involuntary orgasm. Key thing to remember, the prosecution should have the exact same relationship with the evidence that as the defense should have. And that means that the prosecutor doesn't get to say things like, put Teresa in Steve's bedroom to the woman running the DNA tests. Even the lawyers representing Steve are just pieces in a broken system. They are there to convince the jury that the system is working against their client in ways that are unfair, but they're really there because they're getting money in exchange. And they are getting paid. In a phone call between Steve and his brother, you hear that the Avery family is selling their garage salvage yard to pay for the two attorneys. Well, that's simply not the case. They put up their, or they wanted to put up the yard as collateral for the bond, but they weren't taking it. They denied that, and they even up to it, if I remember rightly. Steve's family is losing their business. Well, no, they didn't. Losing it in other ways, but not in the sense that he's saying that they sold it. And in exchange, these men try to use their experience to defend him from a system that was supposed to treat him fairly. It sounds like it's messed up until you realize the convictions are actually the point of the whole process. If it's expensive and impossible, it's because it's supposed to be. Enough so that people with less than Steve Avery don't even have the opportunity to contest and probably fail in a way that he does. Is your life's work enough to pay two men for 4 months of their time? No. Guess it's time to take the plea bargain. All in all, it's cashing in on convictions, monetarily or through some variety of vendetta satisfaction, or in the least crazy scenario, people getting to use their specific authority and agency to tamper with evidence to make their jobs a little easier. It's a lot easier to convince somebody of Stephen Avery's guilt when they hear details such as his blood being in the car, which totally didn't come from an easily accessible and clearly tampered with blood sample in a courtroom by the police department. His nephew's false confession, or how the victim's key, again, it's not keys, it's key, was magically found on his bedroom floor 8 days after the investigation started by an officer that wasn't supposed to be there. What's important to remember about this particular documentary, about this particular investigation, is not that it's unusual. Cops plant evidence all the time. If making a murderer is supposed to convince us of anything, it's that the legal system worked against Steve exactly as it usually does. The intent was never to investigate an incident for the sake of truth or justice, although the people doing the investigation will always admit that if nothing else, justice can be a byproduct. The end justifies the means. Mm-hmm. How can they do this? 4 reasons. 1, nobody cares about the defendants. This is a big one. These people aren't saints. Stephen Avery was, by a few different accounts, a complete piece of bad behavior. But if you believe in the idea of justice, then if it was anybody from Steve to his not so smart nephew to Steve Buscemi, I presume referring to his character in Fargo, or Shamu. I had to look up who Shamu was. Shamu was an orca whale, killer whale, kept in activity in a park, a water park. And there's reference again to a big killer whale in the next sentence. So, sorry, let me start that again. But if you believe in the idea of justice, then if it was anybody from Steve to Brendan to Steve Buscemi or Shamu, the trial and the punishment would be the same. Brackets, I'd love to see a sequel to Blackfish, which is, again, about a killer whale called Tillicum. That guest stars Ken Kratz as the guy sexting the whale. I should also say that I wrote that sentence while completely exhausted. If the crime is the same, the punishment is the same. And if the punishment is the same, then the trial must be completely fair. Don't forget that people go to prison after signing false confessions and get executed while actually being innocent. A sad implication of being okay with this means that you'd have to be okay with a loved one having the same trial that Stephen did. If you would argue for a fair trial or yourself, then you would have to argue the same rights for Steve. Society simply isn't fair without that. If you can accept that everybody needs to get treated fairly, then who else are we talking about? 2, nobody knows as much about the law as those involved. Therefore, we have to assume that people in charge are making correct choices. The law is a thing that has become more and more complex, and people who make a living understand that law are usually able to understand the basic economics behind being a lawyer. You have a supply of knowledge and experience, and the best way to capitalize on your resources is to ensure that the ratio of supply and demand work more towards your favor. Through years of subtle decisions made by like-minded people, intentional or not, the true winners of our court system are lawyers, people who can understand the intricacies of the codes they write themselves, all the while charging people for their translations. Supply and demand. This could be fixed by reducing the supply, i.e. changing laws to prevent unnecessary arrests. But one of the biggest reasons that can't happen is that there would be a lot of political pushback by people who depend on the industry created by these arrests. The Drug Enforcement Agency, I'm not too sure what the ATF is, but I'm sure I've heard of some similar agency. Remember. I'm sure the dude told me that. He told me a load of things and I've forgotten. Anyway, and others receive their funding because the laws are written to maximize their need if they have anything to say about it. Not to mention the private prison enterprise, which, and I know Mark will be jumping about this one, which has capitalized on light speed convictions for profiting from fuller prisons. We're now at a point where entire industries have formed on the prosecution's regular conviction rate, something that sounds insane when you say it out loud. This, I like the ending of this one. Particularly as we're looking at judges at the moment, aren't we? And I will be doing another video about judges and also getting back to strengthening forensic science. But I really wanted to share this one with you because it was so good. And the fact that, as I say, the kicker comes at the end. 4, judges are publicly elected, and when you're trying to advertise your accomplishments against your opponents, there needs to be some sort of metric to brag about. John Oliver already covered this. Okay. Patrick Willis, the judge who oversaw the murder conviction for Avery, ran unopposed for the majority of his terms. He retired in 2012. As stated briefly, the judge has a much greater incentive to ensure a high conviction rate, lest he be thought of as inefficient. It's much easier to brag about 100% conviction rate than it is to explain that you carefully attempted to understand the position you were put in, ensured fairness to everybody, and used intelligent consideration to make the correct choices in the short time of a Green Bay Packers TV timeout slot. Very good. The combined choices of all people involved have slowly created a system that is, at the very least, unsustainable, and at the very worst, is bastardized night terror of the framers' idea of a fair trial. What this means is that the deck is stacked so hard against the accused that there is almost no chance of financially, socially, or even medically recovering from an accusation, let alone conviction. Is that really the country we want to live in? With no agenda in this case, do you really think that the prosecution took the right steps? Here's the kicker. The argument to this is simple. The man is, most likely, according to Sam, guilty. Regardless of the blood sample clearly being tampered with, or the obvious motives and vendettas against Mr. Avery held by people at every level of the Justice Department, or any number of reasons that this trial was a sham, he did commit the crime, and prison is where he belongs. Well, as I say, I did send a message to Sam, say, you know, have you seen episode 2, part 2? No response. But in fairness, he says, unfortunately, we can't be sure. So he is just giving his opinion. He's saying that Steve, in his opinion, is most likely guilty. Well, I would imagine that his perception of that has changed. As I say, unfortunately, we can't be sure. We'll never be sure? Well, not sure about that. And that's where the whole thing has just gone so horribly, horribly wrong. Steps were made long before Stephen Avery stood trial to ensure that he and people like him weren't brought to justice, because without the truth, there is no justice. It's a lot neater to prosecute without investigating and call yourself the authority. Never mind what's true. Finding the truth takes effort. Sorry, never mind what's true. Finding the truth takes effort. Effort costs money, and we all now know that given the choice, we'd all rather put our money somewhere else. Okay. I thought that was all but that one paragraph where he thinks Steve is probably guilty. I suppose, in fairness, what I would also say is, and I don't know if you felt the same when I watched series 2. Obviously, we knew a lot more about the case by series 2. But when I watched series 1, it struck me that, you know, Teresa could have been murdered anywhere. You know, she could have been. I knew straight away. There's no way that Steve reduced Teresa to those cremains in a bonfire in a few hours behind his garage. I knew that wasn't the case. You know, it's very difficult to get a body to that state. But I did think, I must admit, that maybe, you know, she could have been murdered anywhere in Manitowoc County, Calumet County. You know, it could have happened when she got home. Ryan could have been there, decided to, you know, have an argument with her. And I do think that in this case, because of the suspicion, understandable, you know, suspicion of members of Steve's immediate family, let's put it that way, and we all know who we're talking about, that has brought the case right to Steve's neck of the woods, right to his next door neighbors, and that's the big problem. Anyway, okie dokie. Let's go through one or two of the comments. Yeah, Mystic Jinx. I love how you say garage. It's just an English way of saying we don't say garage. For example, and I used to do this with the dude all the time. I used to say to him, you know, show me the D in water, because he would say water. And I would say, show me the A in Scotland. It's Scotland. Anyway, we're not gonna get into arguments over pronunciation. So Millbilly, hi. Dark Side of the Moon, Paul Ward, hi. Sean, Millbilly, Dr. Silkman, yeah, Paul, Sean. Oh, hi, Sherry, Lynn Pontillo, Sean, Dr. See, when I scroll down here, this is going at a sensible speed for me to read. Yeah, Nancy is a disgrace. Yes, very, very, very much a friend of Kratz, and I think also Robert Herman is quite a fan of Nancy Disgrace. Okay, here we've got here. Hi, Alice. As I say, should be interesting. I did get a message early this morning, and hopefully we will get Hi Beam Green. We will get a somebody apparently from the sort of guilty camp who wants to come on and present their arguments. I must admit, for me, one of the most interesting sort of startup question would be, do you think that Steve was adequately apologized to for his wrongful conviction of 1985? Because, you've got some guilties that won't even accept there was anything wrong with that 1985 conviction. Anyway, we'll wait and see. As I say, just one of these things that you pick out of reading reading Blind Injustice, that whereas it is a case sometimes of we put two and two together and we get this huge conspiracy theory. The system is just so poor. I mean, how poor does it need to be that even a guilter, even somebody who thinks that Stephen actually did it, is saying how poor the system is. This is why, hopefully, Kathleen Zellner is going to give everything a bit of a shake-up very, very soon. Anyway, as I say, I have got, I don't know if you saw them at the top of the screen, I've got loads of stuff ready to go, looking at the various judges in the Manitowoc. They've got 3 branch judges. Bob Duane. Who have they got? They've got Bob Duane. They've got Geraldine Dietz, and of course Mark Roher. So it'll be interesting to have a look at them in a bit more detail. Anyway, that's all for today. As I say, tomorrow hopefully we'll do a second part to, if not Judge Angie, then who? Got some stuff lined up for that. Well, I'm going to go and see if Jazz, if the rugby is on, I will go and prove to my wife that I can multitask by sitting on the settee, drinking beer, watching the TV, and operating the remote control. So we'll see you all later. Bye for now.